Good evening, everyone. Another episode of the Game Changers. Well, Wendy is not here tonight. My partner in crime, she's on vacation. But Greg Kellog, a real game changer in the industry, has accepted my invitation to host along with me another game changer, Doug Orth. I just want to take this opportunity to say thank you to the Sports Affiliation for giving Wendy and I this wonderful platform, for Iggy, JC, and the crew for believing in us and for their continuous support. So thank you guys. What should I say about Doug Orth? then um, he's just another partner in crime. He's one who got me involved in all of it. Fantasy football, you name it. He just, I don't know, Doug is the creator of a preseason matchup analysis, and he's also a proficient, dedicated, uncommitted, high stakes fantasy football player with six figures career earnings and multiple DFS wins in tournaments with at least 7,000 entries. Perhaps most notably, he has played fantasy football for nearly 25 years and has yet to endure a losing money season. Doug Orth, how are you tonight?
I like that intro. No, I'm doing well, thank you, and thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming in tonight. Hi, Abby. Hi, Greg. How are you tonight?
I'm doing outstanding. I'm home alone with my dog. My wife is flying to Italy to get on a cruise with our daughter and grandson and his wife. And I got invited to be on your show. What could be better? I mean, Doug, where else would we be tonight?
I'm so honored, Greg. Thank you so much for coming along. I appreciate that.
Home
Well,
alone
it's
means
my pleasure.
being home alone means we should open up the booze and have some mixed drinks. Let's go. Let's go.
Oh, Doug,
So
that's just cold because I don't drink.
we can
I,
drink water. It's fine.
I,
He can give me a beer. I'll drink a root beer.
We're fine with that. So we're gonna start, Doug. I know that everyone wants to know about the creator of preseason mashup analysis. Can you care to share a little bit about that? Not many people know what is that all about. We would love to hear a little bit about it.
yeah, I, it's hard to describe it in 30 seconds or even a minute, but I'll go at it like this. So right around 2004, I actually remember I had introduced fantasy football to my oldest brother at that point. Like I said, about 2004. And I mentioned to him, man, I said, man, I hate having my guys face the Ravens and the Steelers in the fantasy playoffs. And then it just kind of dawned on me, okay, well, and that was kind of where that was born. And 2 years later, I was working on a system or a way in order to highlight. Again, the initial plan was to just do it for the fantasy playoffs, and then I kind of realized how much of a matchup-based league, even back in 2006, I recognized how much of a matchup-based league that the NFL was. And so it's just been a matter of developing that and enhancing it and working out the details and streamlining it too. So the nuts and bolts of it are like this. Initially, it was to highlight. I think there were a lot more what we call shadow corners and I'm just going to go for passing game here. There were a lot more shadow corners back when I first started doing this in 2006, and then for the next few years, and then it became more of a realization that teams usually don't travel to corners with best receivers. Most teams will, if you're a left cornerback, you remain a left cornerback. They'll move them around every so often based on the quality of the matchup and whatnot. So a lot of what I do during the preseason then is figuring out, or at least estimating, where a certain corner is going to line up, where a certain receiver is going to line up, and then kind of playing out in my mind how those matchups will go over the course of the game, and then do that for 16, 17 weeks of the fantasy season. The whole process ends up taking me about 6 weeks from start to finish.
Is this an automated drill again?
This is automated?
Yeah, so if say you were to give me the tool, and I know that Darrelle Revis shuts down anybody he covers. But what I don't know, because I don't watch the games, because he's out of my area, is I don't know if he always plays the right side or if he shadows the top receiver. And there's a reason that you would want to know that, because if you have a shutdown corner who shuts down everybody, then if you've got that wide receiver, I don't care who he is, you probably want to sit him that week.
Exactly.
But if the corner always stays on one side, the offense can dictate the matchup by alignment or by motion. And so, it's important to know which corners are stationary, which ones trail, which ones will never cover a slot guy. Because if you put let's see, X, Y, and Z. X is the split end, Y is the slot, I believe, and the Z is the flanker, the guy that's out by himself but off the line. You put a flanker into motion, he can become a slot receiver.
Yes.
Just by alignment. So if you've got a cornerback that never covers a slot and you've got a Z receiver that you want to dictate the matchup away from that cornerback, you just motion him into the slot.
Exactly.
The routes aren't that different for a Z and a slot. To be honest, you're starting off the ball for both guys. One's usually a little wider, but not even always anymore. So when I say is it automated, could you take your tool and give it to somebody else or monetize it, sell it, so that people can play the matchups?
Could I monetize my system?
Yes.
I suppose so. Is it automated? Absolutely not. I mean, everything comes from here and from my research.
In other words, I can't get an advantage in JC and Iggy's league by tapping into you.
Well, you'll be able to see it, and I should have explained this in the first part of it. So, I have a color coded system. Four colors. Red is a heavy lean toward the defense. Yellow is a slight lean toward the defense. White or no color is a slight lean toward the offense, or in this case, the receiver. And then green is obviously a heavy lean toward the receiver. And I do this for the running games as well. But my point being is that there's four colors, so you can look. Ultimately, what happens? I take this 6 weeks of deciphering or at least projecting. I put it on my big board, and the big board will reflect 6 green matchups, 4 white matchups, 3 yellows, and 2 reds, or whatever it takes to get to the 16 games, because fantasy is a 17-week season now. So,
so you start that in the preseason, or
yes,
you have to wait till week 7 of the regular season?
Ideally, at some point, I would love to have this be a regular season tool. This is all preseason, yes.
Carla?
What?
Yes, so I sit with Doug every single night and I watch him do that and I go insane. You don't know how much work he put into this. It's really, it takes the whole day and night, and at times he doesn't sleep before 6-7 o'clock in the morning. It's taking a lot of his time. So my next question to you is gonna be, I know that you have a psychology degree, Doug, but what drew you into writing fantasy football more than going into psychology?
Yeah, that's Greg, I'll go ahead and enlighten you on this story here. So I went from a community college to a four-year college. This is in Kansas now. And when I was visiting the four-year college, Washburn is where I ultimately graduated. When I was visiting there, I asked them if they had and I'm sorry, this is going to be a two-minute answer, but I'll try to make it as official as possible here. So when I was visiting, I told them I wanted to be a sports management major. Okay. So they said, sure. I'm sitting in an anatomy class the following October or November, and I'm thinking to myself, I don't like this. Why is this a required class? Go to my office. I go to the head honchos there at Washburn. I said, I'm sports management. Why is anatomy a required class? And they told me we don't have sports management. Okay. And so then they told me I had 2 weeks to change my major. So I ended up becoming a psychology major as a result of that. At that point, I was just looking for the most efficient way to become a sports agent because that's what I wanted to do at that point. I took I believe it's called the LSAT. I took the LSAT, and it was about that time I come to the realization that I learned some more stuff. I learned some more of the grimy and backstabbing nature of the sports agent business, and I decided that's not the way I wanted to go with my career. It took another 6 or 7 years. I left Nebraska to come out to Connecticut in 2006 for ESPN, and then a year after that, I found a job at Sports Sticker, which is about 30 minutes from where I am right now. And that effectively, even though I was already writing, I had done some fantasy writing. That took my writing from being just kind of a layman's writing to understanding how you form a story, or having words come out correctly. So, for example, Michigan Wolverines, comma, who. So for the Wolverines, you go, comma, who. For Michigan, you go, comma, which. Stuff like that, where you have those things agree, where people don't look at your writing and say, this guy didn't pay attention in English class, type of thing. Those are the things I kind of learned with that job, and then once I got a taste of that on a full-time basis, it was just natural for me to stay writing.
That is so important. I used to tell people that wrote for me when I was hosting young writers that it takes years to earn credibility in this hobby. It takes 5 minutes and one bad article to lose it. And your information can be perfect, but if you can't deliver it in a meaningful way, if you misspell a player's name, little things like that kill your credibility. We've got a guest, Carla, that's got a comment. Jameson Hutchison is actually a guest on my show, not this Thursday, but next Thursday he's going to be on. So you want to read it for Doug so he can see it?
Of course. So I get to meet Jameson as well at the expo this year. And he's asking you, Doug, what programs do you use with this info? I know most people use Excel for models or projections, but do you use others like Python, /R, or so on?
Yeah, at some point I would love to be Python R proficient. That's not where I'm at right now. I don't have the time to learn coding. So that's not where I'm going with that. I use exclusively Excel and then some websites I trust to get the charting information. And then, look, another thing I do too, in the off season, what I do is I evaluate prospects. So it can be, some years I've done up to 50. Usually I get around 30 done. So I tend to put a lot of weight into how I evaluated a certain player. Now, I'm sticking with the offensive side, but that doesn't mean that I'm not paying attention to when a guy comes out in the draft, that I'm not paying attention to what the guy's strengths and weaknesses are on defense as well. So it all kind of blends in. And but to answer Jameson's question, it's exclusively Excel and a handful of websites that I trust their advanced analytics.
My question would be, where can the user get your information? Where do you publish it at?
Yeah, everything is on fftoday.com.
Fantasy Football Today, which has been around for a very long time, very credible site, and it's run by good people.
Yes.
Your turn, Carla.
So, my next question to you, Doug, what's the biggest risk you've taken in your career and how did it pay off?
I think several, but the one I think coming out here to for ESPN back in 2006, I tell people, Carla knows the story well. I tell people my first trip out. I'm sorry, my first trip out here to the East Coast was back when I was a freshman for sophomore in high school. That was for 4-H. For anybody that knows what members in the Midwest, people know what 4-H is. People out here may not know so much about 4-H, but to get back to your question though, my first real time being out here on the East Coast was my interview for ESPN. I came out, I believe I came out on a Thursday night and I left on a Friday afternoon. So I spent less than 24 hours here in Connecticut interviewing for the job and then heading back to Nebraska where to go home for the weekend. It took 3 months from the time I met the recruiter until I got the interview. It took another 3 months from the interview before they called me up and said, "Hey, you got the job." I had 3 full weeks, but I essentially had a week and a half to move out here, move everything. And mind you, I was in a 2-bedroom house, and I found out when I got here because I had 2 days to look for a place out here in Connecticut. So I came out here on a late on a Wednesday night. I had Thursday and Friday to look for an apartment to stay at. I ended up taking a 1-bedroom here because that's all the production assistant position would allow me to afford at that time. And so anyway, to answer your question, the biggest part or the biggest risk though, coming out here not knowing anybody, being thousands of miles away from anybody that does know me, and just believing in myself that I was going to make it.
That's good. Greg.
Yeah, I was just wondering, Doug, you've been in the fantasy game for a long time. What got you into your first fantasy league? Do you remember, did you win the first league? Was it a brother, a friend, a coworker? Who introduced you to fantasy sports? And do you focus exclusively on football or do you do other fantasy sports?
I'll take the second question first. Now it's exclusively football. I've played fantasy basketball. I've played fantasy baseball. I've actually lost my interest in fantasy baseball for a couple of reasons. One, I won the last 6 leagues I was a part of in fantasy baseball, so the challenge of it was beginning to lessen. The thing that probably drove me most away from fantasy baseball, though, was the day-to-day reading through every box score. You do that for 4 or 5 months, and then when it comes August and you don't prepare football, you have to make a decision. And so I just call it being baseball out. By the time August rolls around, when you need to be focused in those, that's when I found my attention lacking. And so I just went out with baseball. I didn't play fantasy basketball all that long. And but yeah, so exclusively now fantasy football. What got me into it? I remember that well, actually. I think it was I want to say it was the winter, or let's say the spring of 1980s. And as to hear people tell it, I might as well have been a sports encyclopedia. Okay. And I'm thinking at that time, I'm still in college. I'm struggling just like any other college student is. I'm thinking, I know a lot about sports. I've got to be able to make money with this knowledge of sports that I have, right? And so one thing led to another, and that fantasy football, I was just really beginning to gain my appreciation for football. It's not that I hadn't watched before. I'd watched football. I think the first Super Bowl I remember was the 85 Bears Patriots. I think that's the first Super Bowl I remember actually watching that I can actually remember watching. But no, it wasn't a brother or anybody that got me into it. It was just a realization, or at least a fascination with the idea that I should be making money with sports knowledge that I have. And so the next year I started, I was in 4 leagues my first year, won 2 of them. And I thought, well, okay, I must be pretty good at this. And so it's just continued now since then.
Was it a money play or a competition play?
Just the first year, the first year I played was the only year I haven't played for money.
So that was just competition at the time.
That was just competition, yes. And then, like I said, it was realization of, because it was all born out of the idea or the desire of, I should be making money. I've got all of this information in my head. I should be able to make money doing this.
Carla.
I have a question from the sports affiliation, Doug. They do fantasy basketball league that drafts around Christmas. Would you be up for that?
Not me.
Yeah. For all the reasons I said. The last time I played fantasy basketball, I believe, was 2008. Remember having Sean Marion on my team.
I don't even know who's in the league right now.
Yeah, It's funny because, as we'll probably get to a little bit later, we'll talk about reffing basketball. You would think for somebody that refs basketball that I would enjoy all aspects of all levels of basketball more than maybe any other sport. And I find the NBA. I watched Miami Heat in the playoffs because they're the closest thing in the NBA to a team that plays basketball the way it should be played. But I have a hard time watching the NBA because of the officials, and it's not the officials' fault. It's the way the officials are told to officiate the game. Star power matters in the NBA to the officials or to the league, and the league filters that down to the officials, saying, "Hey, we need to keep player X, player Y into the game." So, if there's a question between whether or not this guy committed a foul or this guy committed a foul, ask yourself who the people come to see and who the people didn't come to see, and put the foul on the other guy. That's just an example.
For me, it was simpler. I quit watching the NBA because Magic Johnson came down on a 3-on-2, and I saw him make a fake to go behind his back, and then he kind of palmed the ball and pushed it forward. And I saw the defenders jump one way, jump the other way, and then fall over trying to get back the first way they jumped. And I saw 2 moves, but there were 3. So when they slowed it down, the first jump was made because Magic placed his hand on one side of the ball.
Yeah.
He didn't move the ball. He just placed it. Then he made a fake the other way. They jumped that way, and then he flipped it. So it was the third move. It was too fast. I love basketball, but the pro level is just too fast for my eye to pick out the intricacies of the game. And I loved basketball, but it's too fast a game for me, to be perfectly frank. And so I focused on football from then on. But you're speaking from a referee object. Why is that?
Why am I speaking at it from a referee's point of view?
Yes.
Well, other than the fact that I've been officiating basketball now for, I believe, 8 years, since 2015. I was already starting to lose interest in the NBA before then, but just finding out about how, again, some of the intricacies that I discussed.
Hey, Doug, that's yes. What we call a segue into a question you're supposed to be expecting. Why is that the audience didn't know you were a referee, so that kind of eased that in.
Well, I'll lay the groundwork for that question, okay? But yeah.
I'll have another for him.
Like I said. So I was already starting to lose interest in the NBA at that point. I think the best teams in the NBA, and take this for what it's worth. I mean, I watch during the playoffs now, and that's all I watch. So maybe my opinion doesn't mean anything, even though I'm a basketball official. I don't know. Best teams in the NBA play decent defense 60% of the time, and it's hard for me to watch basketball when it's Olay defense. Let's say a third of the time. Let's be gracious and say it's a third of the time. So let's say they play defense 2/3 of the time. It's it's hard. It's a hard watch when a good defensive effort means you gave up 100 points. That doesn't. And so when I thought exactly, yes, points do matter. So yeah,
points matter for rating, but one of the most colorful players in NBA history was a terrible offensive player. He couldn't hit a layup, but Dennis Rodman could shut down Larry Bird, and he was a rebounding maniac. Purely defensive player of the year a couple times. What people don't know, Michael Jordan was also a great defender on the basketball court. And they seem to have lost that. Lost that art. Yeah, it is an art form. It's effort. Our coaches always said, basketball is fun when you're on offense. On defense, it's effort. It's work, and you got to work at it. And when you're playing against guys like Stephen Curry that can take one step across the half court line and bury a three, you got to be on his face the whole time.
Yeah. So go ahead. With the groundwork now laid, I want to hear this question. No, go ahead.
So you're not just a basketball official. I know that you're a flag football official as well. You play softball. You used to play basketball, and you played in college. You played football as well, right? So you played sports in college, and then you became an official in later in life. So that's part of how you took officiating in life. So how did your basketball career impacted you professionally, and especially that it relates being a fantasy football manager and analyst?
Yeah. So I mentioned to my college, so I'm sure there's plenty of people out there that went to 2 high schools and 2 colleges. Well, that's my story. I started out my first school, my first high school was in a town of 350. So my graduating class was a group of 13, and the high school was 50 people. So just to give you some perspective of where I came from.
Really small one.
Yeah, as a freshman, and believe me, and Carla, Carla has the unabridged story as far as this. I could go on for an hour just on this story, but I was a freshman starter on a team that ended up going to state for the first time in 63 years. This is back in 1991, and the following year I was an all-stater on a 2-13 team. At that point, I decided that I had owed it to myself to try to do my best to get myself in the best position to be a Division I player, or at least get to the Division I school. And so I transferred to one of the bigger programs. So the way it is in Nebraska is Class A, Class B, Class C1, C2, D1, D2, D3. At least that's what it was when I was still playing. I went to a Class B school, one of the more prominent up-and-coming Class B schools at the time. And to say that I don't regret transferring to that school, but I obviously couldn't have expected the basketball portion of it to go as poorly as it did. And I don't feel like that was any fault of my own. Maybe it was. I wasn't made aware that I did anything to create that. So I expected at that point, at that time, you had to set out a semester when you transferred schools. I don't know if it's still that way or not, but so I expected to start playing my second semester of my junior year. That didn't happen. So some things happened the following summer. When I say some things happened, I'll just give you an example. I had a 50-point game in a Sunday league game one day. The following day, the following morning, we have open gym. The coach comes, sits next to me, and that's when he tells me you're not going to be anything more than an 8th or 9th man for us. He had already determined in the summer. He couldn't even allow me to enjoy that game that I just had. He had determined you're going to be a bench player for us, and you're going to play much longer. So
did he recruit you?
Yes, illegally, I might add.
He recruited you to come to his school, and then he sat you because you were too good? Or did he have a son on the team?
No, I never got the explanation for it. I was too timid back then to ask for. I was just
You were a kid.
The way I was raised. You don't question authority. So I learned to question authority later, but that's neither here nor there. So anyway, as my senior year progressed, it became pretty clear to me. Okay, so this Division I thing isn't going to happen. I know I'm trying everything I can. I remember asking the assistant coach, "What can I do?" And he said, "There's nothing you can do." Okay, so I kind of got in my head at that point. If I'm not going, if I'm going to go down, I'm going to go down my way. And so I told myself at that time that, and these were my thoughts at the time. Just bear with me. This is a 17-year-old kid talking. That okay, if I'm not going to get, if you're not going to play me, if you're not going to give me what I think I rightfully deserve, I'm going to embarrass the people out there that do have that thing. And so it became my mission each and every day in practice to basically embarrass the starters. I mean, embarrass them in a basketball fashion, right? So that's where, I think there was already plenty of competitiveness in me, but that's what sent me from maybe here to here. And the beauty of it is I don't regret it. I don't regret that part of it either. I'm glad it's made me competitive, because if you're going to make money in this industry, if you're going to do anything well in life against when you have a lot of other competitors, you better bring something to the table that other people can't bring. And I think for the most part, one of the reasons I've had as much success, at least in the financial or the money part of it, is because I tend to outwork people.
People don't understand that concept nowadays. And I say that knowing that people think that, I put in an extra hour or two, that's working. When I was doing fantasy early in my career, I was working 50 or 60 hours at a regular job that fed my family. I spent another 40 or 50 hours every week doing fantasy, writing, studying, and talk. I spent hours on the phone with Wendy's bestie, Bob Harris. I was living in Atlanta area at the time. He was out in New Mexico or Arizona, I don't remember. I'd call him up and speak till 3 a.m. my time, which was 1 a.m. his time. And he always took my calls. Bob did. The one thing I loved about the expo is people like Wendi got to meet the old guard that have been around for 25 and 30 years, that they think, well, I can't talk to this guy. He's a Hall of Famer.
Yeah.
Trust me, you can talk to a Hall of Famer, because we're no different than you are. We have a passion for the game. And if you're going to the expo, you've got a passion for the game. So I got to ask you, what's your most memorable occasion at the expo? What happened at the expo that brings a smile to your face?
Mhm.
Wow.
You better answer the correct answer here.
That sounds personal.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, that's 2 rated R. That's 2 rated R. No. Man, it's a good time in general to isolate it to one thing that brings a smile to my face. Wow.
Told you I was going to ask tough questions.
Yeah, I don't have an answer for that. I do when I think about karaoke, it brings a smile to my face. That's for sure. But
explain it.
Explain the karaoke.
Yeah, because I didn't go because my back was killing me. But explain what happened at karaoke night. Did Scott put on a show?
Yeah, well, he put on a show last year. 2022. I only got to see that online because they took that to a bar outside that I did. Carla and I, and then a couple other guys, we went out to, I believe, Long Home Steakhouse, and we had a nice dinner that night. We didn't realize until after the fact that Scotty the King and his merry group of men were out at like a dive bar somewhere else out there in Canton, and they were just living about them. And so when I think about karaoke, I think about hearing Scott's rendition of, I believe it was "Walk This Way" from Run DMC. And then this year, I don't know the name of the guy, but he was getting up on the table and he was basically playing to the crowd. Which, getting up on the table in a hotel bar is kind of a bit of a risky move, but it was still fun.
So it's not all football at the expo.
Oh, not at all. We can make it mostly football, but yeah, it's one of the beautiful things. I mean, you were talking about before where these Hall of Famers are going to be there. And I'm thankful I didn't have this because I'd already competed against a handful of Hall of Famers in experts leagues and whatnot. Talk to them. I've been talking about them now probably off and on since I talked to them at the expo. But you find out. Yeah, football brings you there, but it's the stories, it's personal stories that, like, okay, this guy does that, but this is what he does. This is his family. This is what he likes doing. These are the things that make him tick, that type of thing. So it begins with football, but it can be so much more than that if you just open yourself up and allow yourself to make yourself available and put your story out there.
Your turn, Carla.
Tell me more about the expo. I know that a couple years ago you went to the expo and you had a call to Lebanon. So what went there?
Lebanon.
Do we know anybody from Lebanon?
No.
Well, I was wondering if this was going to come up. So in 2021, and I'll go ahead and tell the story. You can just give me the we're not doing this. We're not telling this. So I've known Carla for, I think we agreed on probably at least 5 years before we started going out. We met at the YMCA here around here in town called Plainville. And anyway, then it was the summer of 21, and she invites me to one of her Zumba events at her place, and get to talking a little bit. And I told her this after the fact too, shortly after the fact. It didn't take me long to figure out that this is something that I wanted to date and be with. But so 2 weeks after basically we hung out for the first time officially, she ends up going. She had already scheduled a trip to Lebanon back home to see her family. And so, and think about, as far as beginnings of relationships go, think about how difficult that is. You meet somebody, you're like, okay, I think I like this person, and then they're going to be gone for the next month. And fortunately, I had the King's Classic at the expo to take my mind off things for 3 or 4 days, but then she was gone for another 3 or 4 weeks after that. So yeah, the drive to and then obviously being there for a few days and then coming back, that whole time was marked by having chats on WhatsApp and well, that was the beginning of our relationship. So yeah, these were the frequent calls I was getting from Lebanon at this point. So not familiar of it. I don't remember it. I don't recall any other calls from Lebanon. So did I answer that right, honey?
Right. So that's why next year, the next year I went with him to the expo, because he was telling me how much fun the expo was. He was taking a picture of his
Did he lie?
Beautiful.
I lied.
Did he lie? Did you have fun at the expo?
Oh my God, I'm the one who's taking him to the expo every single year right now.
Yeah,
Look at me. I'm hosting a podcast. All because of you, Greg.
Hey, no. All I did was ask you to help me interview a friend of mine that has run the oldest female-only league in the history of fantasy football. And I just wanted you and Wendi to help out. I didn't ever imagine game changers. You've taken it
Look
to
at that.
bring that back, Scott. Doug,
I
bring that
know,
back.
Doug. Bring it back.
What is
So
that?
he was teasing me. So he won that at the expo.
Oh, please.
This is what he won at the expo. So he was taking pictures at the expo and he was teasing me with that. And I'm like, I want to take a picture with that. That's not fair.
Win your own. Get in the Queen's Classic next year. Win your own.
I'm not that good yet, Greg. I'm not that good yet. So I'm learning.
You got a cheat code. You got a cheat
code.
code.
Interesting that you mentioned that. She doesn't believe in my track record yet. So that I just got to win one
That's
more
why
year.
I'm with Casey.
All right. I have told everybody that will ever listen that the difference between experts, including Hall of Famers, and serious fantasy players is nil. The only difference is the accolades. The actual knowledge level is pretty much the same. And that said, even the best people in fantasy are going to be wrong 40% of the time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay. At least 40% because there's so many variables. So I got to ask you, Doug, what's your most embarrassing call this year?
Well, okay. I was thinking this is the first thing that comes to mind, so we'll go with this one. So I did a bold predictions article. That's the way I wrap up every one of my preseason series, mostly because I'm asked to do what I don't like to do. I'm not a hot takey guy. I'll do reasoned bold predictions, but that's as far as I go. I think most of my bold predictions are going to end up being pretty good. The last one, though, is looking pretty bad, and that was that Mark Andrews was going to overtake Travis Kelce as the tight end 1 this year, and that Darren Waller was going to go finish a point behind Kelce for tight end 2. And
a lot of people were down on Kelce this year.
Yeah.
I was saying he should be picked 101 because of the point differential by position. There was such a drop off in tight end 2, tight end 12 from tight end 1. That said, he's 34 years old. I could have been just strong. Mine, I said, and it may still come true, but it's looking less likely. I said that Jahmyr Gibbs would outscore Bijan Robinson this year as a fantasy running back. And I didn't consider it a bold prediction because I thought Gibbs would be used in the passing game the way he was last week.
Yeah.
He got 9 catches. If he'd been getting 9 catches every week, he'd be so far ahead of Bijan, it wouldn't be funny right now.
Yeah, as I recall, I believe the age was what was holding me up in my major reason for Kelce. Now, I know tight ends can go a little bit longer in their career than receivers and certainly running backs, but I think one thing I'm realizing, first of all, with Kelce last year, I believe 7 of his touchdowns came in 2 games. I think he had 4 touchdowns against the Chargers in 1 game. I might be not remembering that correctly because I haven't looked.
That might be true, but he still gets a lot of yards and catches.
Yeah, exactly. So it was a combination of these teams, at least because he was just killing the AFC division foes last year, and of course he's doing it again. But what I think I underappreciated was how much of his game is reading zone coverage, finding the open spot. You don't need to be fast to do that. You need to be sharp.
He doesn't run routes.
Yeah.
He runs to an area, reads the coverage, and moves. But he doesn't have fixed routes like most players do in the NFL. And he and Mahomes are on such a good wavelength that they can look and they read the defense when they line up. They know where he's going to initially start. And then as soon as the defense starts adjusting, Mahomes seems to know where Kelce's going to go. And it's an amazing connection. It really is.
It is.
They sync really well.
Yeah.
So Doug, how do you approach innovation and thinking outside the box in your work? And what are some examples of your most creative ideas?
I think we're talking about probably my most creative idea, because understand when I first started doing this in '06, there may have been advanced analytics, but they sure as hell weren't available to the public.
Yeah.
What I was doing back then, I still look at that as being. I didn't realize it in the moment, but that was pretty darn ahead of its time. And not only that, but just the amount of work I put into it. I technology, the availability of advanced analytics is making that stuff easier. But there's the majority of the people in this industry aren't putting in that kind of work to do what I do. So, and that's not a boast. I just think to me, that's an observation that I think I can make and make with some confidence based on the reactions I've had.
So what do you think?
Yeah,
So what do you think then, if you're talking about your industry, what do you think the biggest challenge that the industry is facing right now?
I think the expo does well. Okay. Let me start with my number one component, which I already talked about earlier, and that's being a hot takey culture. I believe I had this in one of my columns. I'm going to probably misquote it, but Carl Sagan had a great quote about claims without proof are. It was something ridiculous, and basically suggesting, yeah, it's anyone can say something, but can you back it up? Essentially, is what I got. It's been a while since I read that book, but it really stuck. It stuck with me at that time, and it just spoke to me as far as I can sit and say Travis Kelce's going to score 3 touchdowns next week. I can say it next week. I can say it the week after it. One of these weeks, I'm probably going to be right. Okay, just because I was right 1 out of 3 or 4 weeks, tell me why. Tell me why he's going to score 3 touchdowns. Tell me why he's going to have 12 catches. Tell me why you believe it. Don't just say that it's going to happen. Tell me why you believe it. People are, even the most casual players want to know why. I firmly believe that. I think that's why I approach this the way I do. Is people want to know why, and if you can appeal to them on that level, they'll understand. I believe real football knowledge, unlike a lot of other people, I think real football knowledge actually carries over to fantasy. And I think a lot of people will just look at a box score and they'll say, "This guy." Thank you.
Too many analysts in our industry are stats only. They look at the stats and they correlate everything on stats. Understanding why a team does what it does or how it does what it does goes a lot further than the stats ever will. And if you can get to know coaches, especially coaches that have coached at that level, at the NFL level, because it's way different than high school and college coaches. Some of the concepts are the same or similar, but the limitations at the pro level, because the quality of athletes, even on the worst teams, is different than college or college or high school. The simple truth is knowing, does this cornerback carry over or is he one-sided only? Does it impact him? There's a whole different technical way to backpedal if you're on the left side or the right side. Because you turn your hips differently because you protect the inside of the field or the outside of the field. And if you're on a different side, it's the opposite side of your body when you're doing this. It's people, if you understand that and then you understand receiver routes, most people think they've heard route tree, but they may not even know what a route tree is. As a high school wide receiver, I knew 0 through 9 were different routes.
Right.
Okay. Odd on our system, odd went in, even went out. But so much of the NFL routes are two types that don't correlate to a tree. There's the timing route where you have to be at a specific part of the field at a specific number of seconds after the snap. And it doesn't matter how you get there, you just have to get there. That's a timing route.
Yeah.
Then there's the read routes where you read the defense and you adjust your route, your break inside or outside based on how you're being covered. And if you don't understand that, it's hard for you to understand why 1 week receiver A gets 6 targets and the next week they get 12.
Yeah.
But a lot of times it's based on the defense they're facing.
There's that. I'm going to say two things. I'm going to just carry on with what you're saying. I think a lot of people, analysts included, I'm not going to say a certain percentage, but I'm going to say, let's say the box score watchers, as we like to call them, I guess, in the industry. Quarterback dropbacks are timed with, in the first example that you were saying, the quarterback dropback is timed with the receiver's steps. So a 3-step drop is going to necessitate a certain step, a number of steps for that receiver. That's one example. That's how you build timing. 3-step drop, maybe the receiver takes a 4-step out. Maybe that's the way it is.
Or slant, yeah.
Or slant, exactly. Talking now, going back to your first point about left cornerback versus right cornerback. I heard this in relation to offensive line play, and I think it carries. I think it speaks to what you're saying now. The left tackle, I think it was a left tackle being interviewed, and he was asked, well, why is it so much more difficult to play on the right side? And he said, well, okay. And I forget if he was talking about shooting a basketball or eating or whatever. Okay, let's just use the eating example. Let's say you've been eating right-handed all your life. Okay, now start eating with your left hand. It doesn't come natural, and eating's a lot easier than to work on your footwork as your backpedal and trying to protect the franchise's $40 million a year investment. So, but
by the way, that's the quarterback he's talking about there.
So the footwork, as you're talking about with cornerbacks, that's why shallow corners are, that's why they're not a dime a dozen, one of the reasons. But just imagine doing something right-handed all your life, and now you're being asked to do it left-handed. Footwork's different.
Or vice versa.
Vice versa, yes.
That's what I call critical thinking, right, Greg? He's always thinking like that.
Knowing the game is more than knowing the stats. And
yes, I agree, 100%.
And I've maintained that, but so many analysts just know the stats, and they do trends. And these micro analytics scare the crap out of me because, number one, I don't know where they're coming from. So I don't know how trustworthy they are. And number two, I think sometimes you get bogged down in the minuscule details that you forget the overall picture.
Yeah, agreed.
He takes pride in his work. He works like I said, he doesn't sleep until he makes sure that every single thing is put to the T. Like every single one is really, really like good. So
yeah, we need to get him to the sports affiliation so I can get access to his documents without paying for it.
Yeah. Before we finish that, Doug, we spoke a lot about you and I. We spoke a lot about injury prone. We hear a lot on Twitter, and we see, oh, this guy is injury prone, and this guy is injury prone. Oh, he cannot do this, he cannot do that. What's your thoughts about the injury prone thing? I know that you have different thoughts about this. Do you care to share about that? I really want to hear it from you.
I know I made such a positive impression on Greg. I hope I don't throw him off on this one.
You might be surprised. We may be very close on this.
I'm sure you are.
Okay. Football, what do they talk about? They talk about the mortality rate or the injury rate of football players being 100%. I don't know if that's quite correct, but it's let's say it's
close.
It's 90. It's starting close to 100%.
Yeah.
Okay. To me, and here's the comparison I made a few years ago, and I think it still sticks now. Okay, both of you have kids, right? I know Carla does.
I've got 3.
Yeah, both of you have kids. Wouldn't you say that you just expect your kids at some point, especially when they're young, don't you expect them to be sick at some point?
Of course.
Actually, I kind of expected them to catch it from each other. So I expected them all to be sick at some point.
So
I agree, right?
I was surprised when one didn't get sick.
Yeah. My point in this column, and this is where it came from, was calling football players injury prone is the same as calling kids illness prone. It's going to happen. Right? So it's not now. A certain running style may open you up to a certain type of injury. If you're Chris Carson, yeah, you're probably prone to getting you're probably prone to getting your knees chopped out, and he ended up in his career ended because of a neck injury, because he's a physical runner who got most of his yards between the tackles. He was a very physical runner. One of those, there's going to come a day where, for all the punishment you hand out as a runner, it's going to come back and bite you. That's just the nature of the beast. More of a speed guy, let's say.
Jahmyr Gibbs.
Jahmyr Gibbs. I was thinking Tariq Cohen. I know I think he's still
Kevin Achan.
Yeah, those guys are going to get more of your what I would consider fast twitch injuries, your hamstrings, or soft tissue injuries, I should say, because they're not taking as much contact, but they're also moving faster. So, my stance on injury prone is the same as kids being illness prone. Is my point. They're football players. It's going to happen. Now, to what degree they happen is determined on their play style, and you won't know. And person wouldn't know that unless you're actually watching the games, which is probably another one of my critical points about the industry. Is what, like you said.
If I may, have you heard of the curse of 370?
Oh yes.
Okay, so I am a proponent because I've looked at the numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that it doesn't happen every time, but to most running backs, they get 370 touches. The next year, they're going to degrade in performance. Could be injury, could just be lower performance. Once it was a holdout for the entire year, it's called a curse because it doesn't follow a pattern as to why, but the bottom line is it happens. This year, we're looking at Josh Jacobs and Derrick Henry. They both got over 370 touches last year. This year, they're performing much worse than now. With Derrick Henry, he's 29 years old. So people are saying, well, he may have hit the wall. Okay, maybe. But all I know is that he got over 370 touches once before, yes, and he only played 8.5 games because he got injured. Josh Jacobs hasn't been hurt this year. He's catching the ball more than he usually does. But I think I heard that he's never had a touchdown. He's got 100 receptions. He's never had a receiving touchdown, which is amazing.
Yeah,
but if you look at his numbers from last year, he's down a significant percentage. Hits are cumulative.
Yes.
And it's like, I've heard it, it's like a 35-mile-an-hour head-on car crash. When a linebacker runs into a running back or vice versa. And injury prone, they called Christian McCaffrey injury prone because he missed games 2 years in a row. Well, if you look back to before the first one, his first 2 years, he didn't miss any games. In his second year, he got over 370 touches. His third year, he missed all but 3 games. His next year, he missed 8 or 9 games. So curse of 370s, I think it's real. Do you have a feeling on that, Doug? Is it real to you?
Yeah. Specifically, the curse of 370 isn't what led me to downgrade Josh Jacobs. I have 20 plus teams, and I don't have Josh Jacobs on any of them because I had no faith that he was going to. He had a couple things working against him. High usage season. He didn't report to camp. So you have, and both of those do not tend to work well, especially at running back. If you're a late report and you are coming off a high usage season, unfortunately, as much as I love the running back position and I love high usage guys, I don't probably love you the following season. Another thing about injury prone is you're injury prone until you're not. So I love it how, and McCaffrey's a great example. He played at Stanford. I don't recall him missing any games at Stanford. He may have missed one, right? And I don't think he played the bowl game his final year because he was getting ready. He wanted to be healthy for the draft, if I recall. But the thing about it is, so McCaffrey has a couple injury ravaged seasons or seasons where he succumbed to injury. Now he's injury prone. Then he has last year, and now he's no longer injury prone. How does that happen? So to me, there's a difference between prone to injury and injury prone. And Darren McFadden was the closest thing I could remember to being injury prone. Kadarius Toney's getting there, and who was the guy I wrote about earlier this year? There was another guy I wrote about earlier this year that's getting pretty close to testing my theory on injury prone players. But it was definitely the high usage season that backed me up.
I want to thank you. I want to thank you for not laughing at me. Bob Harris laughed at me about curse. He hated the word curse. And I respect Bob so much. But if you look at the numbers of the backs that reach that threshold, 370 touches or more, and you look at what they do the following year or the following 2 years sometimes, it's impossible not to draw some kind of conclusion.
Yeah. Agreed.
Okay, guys, I think we are done. Greg, do you have any more questions for Doug?
Yeah, Doug, how the hell did you get hurt?
Oh,
No, I got lucky too. I got mine when she was 14 years old. That's when I met my wife.
yeah.
Our first date, I was 17 and she was 14. Took her to a movie and said one adult and one child, and she was so mad. I'm amazed. 50 years later, she's still with me. So
50 years. Congratulations, Greg.
46 married.
You can round up. You can round up at that point.
Well, no, we were together 4 years before we got married. So
Gotcha.
Thank you so much, Greg, for helping me out tonight. I appreciate your time. Doug, you were a great sport. Thank you for being with us. Don't forget, guys, to subscribe to the Sport Affiliate. They have full schedule for amazing programs. Hear them out, and we will see you next Tuesday for Halloween night. Don't forget to dress up. And
one more thing.
Yes.
One more thing.
Before I say who's going to be with us next week.
Yes.
Go ahead.
FSWA has opened up their awards. And I want to call on everybody who's an FSWA member, to nominate Game Changers for Podcast of the Year and to nominate Doug's Tool for Tool of the Year. I think awesome. Since I have not used Doug's Tool. I plan on using it sometime this week, going in and getting a copy and looking at it. But if he is identifying cornerbacks that stay home or float, that alone would make it one of the more valuable tools you will ever get.
So where they can find it again, Doug?
FSWA.org. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. My work is at fftoday.com.
Or at Doug Orth on Twitter.
Or you can find me. You can reach out to me, ask me questions, whatever you prefer to do.
Awesome
there.
job.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. And for next week, we're gonna have Bob Harris with us, as Wendi would say, her bestie.
Oh boy.
We will have her bestie in the show. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. And arrivederci. Bye.
Thank you, guys.